infinite complacency. People went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
If you're anywhere near Golden, Colorado, that's just outside Denver, and are looking to take some likely much-needed time for yourself, look no further than Golden Biohack. They have some truly innovative therapies and modalities to get you back on track and feeling like $1,000,000, such as PEMF, red light therapy, biocharger frequency healing, whole body vibration, and NanoV, to name a few. And they even sport an in-house medical director who offers PRP, stem cell treatments, and more. Check out their website at goldenbiohack.com to schedule a phone consultation and get outside-the-box good health that's as unique as you are. Again, that's Golden Biohack, BIOHACK.com. And might I say, I really appreciate you calling the voicemail line and even being willing to come on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, so where do I start? I'm going to give a little background because I kind of feel we moved to kind of a spooky area. Now, about me, I'm a working professional, empty nester. I am like a year and a half away from my PhD. My husband and I, in fact, my degree was a divinity degree, even though I work in corporate America. My husband and I are devout Christians. We believe in the spirit, that there's a spirit of darkness and light, and there are certain things you just don't fool with. We recognize that there are forces. We know there's, evil that's paranormal, but we also see the Bible as a paranormal book too. We follow a lot about the Nephilim and all that. So, we're not closed eye. As Christians, our eyes are not closed, and we understand that we don't understand everything or know everything. But we always protected ourselves and never would allow things to impede our spiritual life. We protected our spiritual life in the fact, like watching certain horror movies or going out and ghost hunting or things like that. Even though we found that kind of fascinating, we didn't go there because, one, we weren't called. We didn't feel we had the calling on us to do that God had not called us to do that. And also, we knew that tampering with that could leave us open to bring that kind of thing into our household or our family. So in 2015, we decided, we're empty nesters, and we decided, okay, it's time to live the dream. What is our dream? To have a farm and do some permaculture type living, raise our own animals and our own food. We both grew up in that kind of lifestyle and have an organic garden, but not only do that, but also offer that to other people as well, not just, for us, but to have a community. So we started looking for a farm, and we found one in outside of Springtown, Texas, between Springtown and Weatherford, in that area in Parker County, Texas. It's about 70 acres. It had been in the same family for like 6 generations. We bought it from one of the family members directly. We closed on the farm and moved out there in September of 2016. And the first thing we did when we were moving in the house, my husband and I we went and prayed over the house. Both of my parents are from Israel. I'm a first generation Christian. They're, Jews, practicing Jews. And so for us, we believe in blessing the house and putting the azuz on the door. My husband went through the house and we just anointed all the doors and windows and prayed, and we prayed over the property. We just wanted it to be prosperous and be a blessing to anybody that came on. And so we set up our farm, and we've been there. So we moved in September 1st. Around the week of October 15th, a deputy sheriff stopped by, and he introduced himself, welcomed us to the neighborhood, glad we had bought the place. And first thing he asked me was if we had any trouble or any problems out here. And we were like, no. And so he proceeds to tell us that our land back in the early 80s, that there was, they had found a body when they were putting in the electrical easement. They dug up a shallow grave of a young man who had been there, they think, about a year, and they think it was listed as a John Doe. And he said, you're probably going to see that show up on Facebook or the community in the area. At the time, he was listed as a John Doe. And he began to tell us that one of the former owners of the property, one of those family members that actually lived on our land, was actually suspect in that demise of that body. And we were like, oh my gosh. And the owner that we bought from still come by and would shop with my husband and have tea with us, So anyway, that was our first thing of like, wow, thank God we anointed this house and this property before we moved on here. And then he just said, he goes, yeah, we call this Weirdo Alley. And I was like, really? He was kind of saying, yeah, the strip between Springtown and Weatherford, we kind of call it Weirdo Alley. And he starts telling me about in Springtown, Texas, that's where the glowing grave is. And if you go another 10 miles down the road is Aurora, Texas. And that's where the aliens came, where they buried an alien in a grave in Aurora, Texas, that Jim Mars talked about. That was like 15, 20 miles up the road from my house. So we were like, well, we blessed the property and we're happy. So he said that they were going to do patrols, because what had happened is that young people would come on the property near where that easement was, where that grave was found, which was out in our acreage, and that they would go out there and set up Ouija boards and candles. Sometimes they set fire to the pastor.
Oh gosh.
Doing these little teenage stuff, and he said, so we watch it. He said, just keep an eye. He goes, usually you only have problems around Halloween. He goes, that's why I'm paying you a visit. No problem. My husband and I just made a point of paying attention to our pastor. We got through October, no issues. November, no issues. We lived there. We had a couple of weird kind of things happened, but, just one-offs, nothing that concerned us, anything that ever came up. I would just say, okay, Holy Spirit, show me what's going on here. Or I would go to the Word and rebuke. If I felt like it was a spiritual thing, which rarely happened, most of it, I think, was just happenstance.
What kind of things were these, Angela? What kind of little things were these? Do you remember?
Well, when we moved in the house on September 1st, the first week of September, we had been there like 2 or 3 nights. I had a dream that I was in the bed and I was next to my husband, and in my dream is exactly how my bedroom was. I was in my bed and I was asleep, and I want to say young man, he was between 16 and 23, and he was in red sweatpants and a white T-shirt. He was a little fat, roly-poly dude. He was probably about 5'10", 5'8", 5'10", around there, and he had a blanket with him. And he had brownish bobbed hair, and he was clearly had Down syndrome. But he was talking to me, and he was saying, wake up, like that. In my dream, I sat up on the bed. I looked at him and I said, what can I do for you, honey? What you need? Like in my dream, I was caring for him like he was my responsibility. He was trying to talk to me, and then boom, I woke up. When I woke up, I was sitting up on my bed And my husband was like, who are you talking to? And I told him about the dream, and I was like, I dreamed there was this Down syndrome young man. And I told my husband the dream, and my husband said, you need to write that down. I said, whatever. So I went right back to sleep, total peace. I mean, I was not scared on this property at all. I would walk through in the middle of the night in this house. I would go out to check on the chickens in the dark and not even carry a flashlight. I had no fears living here. Then about a couple of nights before that sheriff showed up, I had that same dream. The exact same thing happened, only this time I wasn't sitting up in the bed when I woke up, but I was talking in my sleep, and my husband was like, who are you talking to? And I woke up and I said, oh my gosh, I had the exact same dream that never happened to me before. I had this dream twice in a matter of a few weeks. So when that sheriff came out, that dream never crossed my mind. My husband came to me, and he's the one that brought it up. He said, you don't think that dream was because they have this John Doe that they found on our property years ago. He said, you don't think that John Doe could have been developmentally disabled? And I was like, I am not going to the sheriff's department and tell them I had a dream twice before y'all showed up.
Right.
And this John Doe, you can't identify. Do you think he might be a missing Down syndrome man? Because in what they had told me, that John Doe was in his early 20s, and that they found a trash bag with a lot of designer clothing like Abercrombie and Fitch and Izod and stuff like that. OP, Panama Jack stuff was found in a trash bag in this shallow grave. And they found the body when they told the owner of the property that we had bought it from, he had to move a storage shed because they were putting electric easement through the property, and they had to have a right-of-way. And he had to move that. He fought them over it and tried to get them to put it on another part of his land. And because he fought them on where to put the easement, and when they moved the shed, it was an old shed anyway, and when they knocked it down and they started digging to put in those big pylons for the power, that's when they discovered the shallow grave. And it was they discovered it like in 82, 83, 84, somewhere around there, and that body had been there. And he was known as the Springtown John Doe for a long time. And then I heard that recently they identified him through familial DNA. And I don't know if who they identified was Down syndrome or not. I don't know any of the details. But I just heard from former neighbors, they found that body. But I was actually upset because I'm in real estate. So I was upset that it wasn't disclosed to us at closing that this had taken place, or even that the guy that we bought our property from had been a suspect for years and years and years into the death of this body. And what made them suspicious was the fact that he fought the county on putting on this easement.
Yikes.
It wasn't that he fought the easement, period.
Right.
It's the fact that he fought the easement going right through that part of the pasture, and he wanted it 10 acres over.
Yeah, that is highly suspect. And yeah, they are absolutely supposed to disclose that kind of information, right?
Right. Well, in the state of Texas, not if anybody dies within 20 years.
Oh.
So state of Texas real estate law, they do not have to disclose. And we even we met with the owner before we purchased and asked him about if there's anything been spooky going on or anything in the house. And he was kind of weird with us, but I finally just told him, I said, I'm a woman of God, and I don't fear anything because I know what my authority is. And so I'm not going to worry about it. But we did want to ask him. I always kind of felt like he was holding back. Even my husband, who's very intuitive, felt he was kind of holding back. But, we bought the land. He just kind of seemed like he really had a hard time letting go because he kept wanting to visit us. And he loved going out and walking that pasture. I think it was really hard for him to sell. But he was in his 70s and he could not handle it anymore.
Right.
But he would always tell me, like he would come by and goes, I see that gutter is damaged. He was like, maybe you ought to go put a fence across here and you could run this kind of cattle.
Oh, gosh. He was like your HOA out there, huh?
Right. And we loved it. We loved having him around. we loved the fact that he wanted to come back around the property. Sometimes it got a little sticky. Like one time he showed up, y'all let me move in. I got my sleeping bag in the truck.
Oh,
You got all
goodness.
these extra rooms.
Oh, well, yeah. You're like,
You know.
awkward. What do I say to this? Not looking for a roommate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But he would tell us stories about the land, and he'd bring boxes of pictures that were black and white pictures from like the late 1800s and with all his family members, and he would bring maps and show us, you know, where some of the property had been sold off, you know, how it used to be even bigger piece. And we loved that. And he loved sharing with us, and we loved hearing the stories and hearing about the people that used to live there and the crazy shenanigans he did as a young person. So my husband and I just liked having him around, but we always kind of suspected, like, is he watching out for us, or is there something else we don't know that's going on?
Right.
And at one point, I bought my husband a metal detector, and he went out and he found these big metal brass handles, and a friend of ours goes, "Oh, those look like coffin handles." And I told my husband, "Don't you go out on this property anymore and look at anything. You want a metal detect, go out to the lake, because if you pull up a body on our property, I'm moving."
No kidding. He's like, "Hey, I found a ring. Unfortunately, it's still attached to the person that was wearing it." Yeah.
Right. So we started selling. We both worked corporate jobs. I worked a corporate job from home, and my husband worked a job in town. On the evenings and weekends, we sold eggs, produce, free-range chickens, and those kind of things. And so we had signs up, and people got to know us, and they knew to come by. They would call sometimes and say, "Hey, I need a couple of dozen eggs," or "Do you got any meat birds left," or anything like that. And so we became a part of the community. Well, I befriended a wonderful couple, and her husband worked for the oil rigs. They had small children, like 3, 4, like 5 children between the ages of like 3 or 4 up to age 11. I would play grandma sometimes. I would go out and help babysit, or I would just come and hang out with the kids so that she could get something done in the house while he was out of town. He would tell me things about, he didn't like the route I took was this road. The area that they lived in was like east of Weatherford, off of the freeway, in a community called Hudson Oaks. And it's more of like an affluent, you know, the brick house, the mansion subdivisions with, you know, little mini malls everywhere. They lived there. Now, I could have gone straight down and caught the freeway over, but there was a kind of a shortcut, and it had some zigzags back and forth, and it was called Green Branch Road, and I would take it. It was like an 8 to a 10 mile, depending on which way I went, 8 to 10 mile back and forth through these blacktop roads, going through all these farms and ranches that dumped me out in the back part of Hudson Oaks, which is actually where they lived. And I would take that road, and her husband would say, "You know, I used to work some of those rigs out there. That's a spooky place. You shouldn't be driving there by yourself." And I grew up on a ranch. I am concealed and carry, you know, and so I was like confident that I would be okay. I said to them, "You know, I'm good. I've got a dependable vehicle." I had a new Ford F-150. And so I'm going to take I'm fine with taking these back roads. I grew up on a ranch. I know what I'm doing. And so I would take these back roads to go to their house to babysit. And this is where this event took place. So one evening, it was December 4th, 2017. I will never forget the day. It was starting to get a little dark, just starting. The sun was going down just a little bit. It was starting to get nippy. I was supposed to babysit so that she could go out. The husband was out of town. The wife was there. So I take my little back road, and I go, it zigzags. You're going through all these ranches and this land, and it's a blacktop, and it splits off, and there's not even street signs. If you didn't know to turn left at the oak, you know, the big gnarly oak, you would get lost. I mean, it's just one of those that you just have to learn the route. So I'm going out there, and there was I used to see this house all the time that was beautiful. They had this beautiful RV, and well manicured lawn, and it just kind of seemed out of place with all these ranches and farms out here. But it was very well manicured, and so they were having this huge yard sale. And I had seen when I went to turn onto Green Branch, they had signs out with balloons. I thought, oh, someone around here is having a yard sale. I wish I would have known. I would have left a little sooner and come out here. But I just kept going. And as I come around, I'm seeing more balloons and signs pointing to this house, and it was the big, pretty house. And so I had actually stopped. I looked at my watch. I thought, oh, I've got 30 minutes, and I'm like 5 minutes away from their house. I'm going to go and look at this yard sale. So I go up, park, and climb up the hill, and it's like an acre walk to the house where the garage is. I'm talking to the guy, and he's like, oh, I know who you are. You're the woman that sells eggs and chickens and stuff. And he said, you know, we got some stuff that might be of use to you. And he takes me around the side of his house, and there's these stuff like, you know, he had a lot of the trays that you put planter pots in. So, and they were quality ones. They weren't, you know, the flimsy ones. And I went, yeah, I would really like those. And I explained to him, I said, well, I'm gonna be babysitting. He said, well, he's got some more, and he got some more things that he had some tomato cages, and he had all this gardening stuff. He says, we're moving. And he said, I want to give you this stuff. You know, I offered to buy it. And he's like, no, I want to give it to you. I'm glad someone have it. He goes in, you know, I said, well, I will come get it. And he tells me, all right, you see that RV? He had his RV parked down at the front, and they had it for sale. And it was parked right by the gate that you drove into the property. He said, I'm going to park it down. I'm going to put all the stuff down by the RV, and you come get it whenever you want. And I said, well, I'll come by and get it tonight. And he's like, well, I'll try to be sure to have my son-in-law here to help you load it. I said, okay. And he asked me about what time. I said, you know, 9, 10 o'clock. I don't know. Would that be too late? He's like, no. He said, there's a motion light on that RV. He said, so when you go to get your stuff, he said, just holler it. We'll see the light come on, and we'll come out and help you. So I go babysit, and I come back, and I'm cutting through there. It's probably about 9:15, and I'm coming a different direction, and I'm trying to remember in this blacktop road where all these trees are. I'm trying to go slow because I'm trying to remember it's going to be on my left side now instead on my right, where exactly this house is. I don't want to pass it in the dark. So I'm going kind of slow. And at one point I turned up in a driveway, and I realized, oh no, this is not it. I back out, and I go down around this hairpin curve, and I come up, and I went, oh, here it is. So I didn't want to pull up in their driveway because I knew they had a ding dong bell kind of thing. And by this time I was like, it's 9:15 or so. They're elderly. I know they said their son-in-law would come help me, but I'm just going to grab the stuff. So I park like not all the way through their gate, but right there next to this RV that's for sale outside their gate. So I pull up there and I put my gloves on. I get out of the truck, and while I'm standing there putting my gloves on, I just had this first time ever since I lived out there, I all of a sudden was kind of scared of the dark. And I just had this eerie feeling like something wasn't right. And it bothered me so that I went ahead and opened my truck door and left it open so I would have that light too. I walked over, and he had all this stuff. There were tubs full of empty pots, and there were stacks and stacks of trays. So I started putting them in the back of my truck and stacking these cages, and I found myself just stopping and looking around. And I knew off to about 3 acres away was a tree line of, that went up the side and around back behind his property. It was like a wooded area. I don't know if you would consider it a forest. It was mostly like white oaks and scrub land, but I was just kind of looking, I just kind of got this feeling like something was watching me. I don't know. Maybe it was the first time that I ever felt scared of the dark. And so I started hustling, man. I started throwing stuff in the back of this truck, and I guess I must have set off the gate or the light to the RV, because all of a sudden I saw him open his garage door, and he was standing there with a coffee cup, and he waved at me, and he yelled at me that his son-in-law was going to come over here in a minute. I said, no, I've already got it. It's good. Thank you. I appreciate the stuff. And I finished, put the last load in, filled up the back of my truck, and then I wave and I leave. Well, when I go to leave, I've got to drive kind of slow because I realize I've got all these trays. They're going to go airborne. So I'm driving kind of slow, and I'm going along this blacktop road. And it's one of those blacktop roads that really doesn't have a sides. They're kind of broken off. And I think that's mostly for most of the grain trucks that would go through there, or cattle trucks. And it's one of those blacktop roads that two cars could pass each other. But when you go to pass, you got to really slow down and make sure you make room for the other. So I'm driving kind of slow, and I ended up opening my back window to my truck so that I could make sure that if anything flew out, I could hear it. And I had my truck windows down. I'm going around these hairpin curves, and the road that I was on at the time, Green Branch, had become Timberview or Timberline, whatever the name was. And then at one point it comes back to be Green Branch again. And at one point I come around hairpin curve, and I saw Green Branch, and I went, okay, I'm on Green Branch. That means I'm almost straight away to 51 to go to my house. I'm driving through, and I'm going kind of slow, and it's really dark. On one side is it used to be all wooded, but now it's fenced in, and it's kind of empty lots where they're starting to clear trees, and it's got a little cattle fence, and it's got a little gully, and it's got the blacktop road that I'm on. And on the other side is established cattle land, and it's got a fence, a barbed wire fence that actually, where the barbed wire fence grows through all the bushes and the trees, it's been there that long, and the trees have been cut down, but you can't pull the trees up. When I say trees, I say 3 or 4 inch around, but they've kept them cut down, but you can't remove them from the fence because you would end up tearing up the fence. So that's what's on the side, and that's all cattle land owned by a local rancher. And that farm was probably, I would say, about 2,000 acres. But on the other side of the road that was on my left side, I think he used to own that, and he sold it. It was wooded, but they were clearing it, and they had marked it off as lots. So they had these little dirt driveways that they had put in. Well, all I know is I'm driving down the road. I actually, at one point, this is what was going through my mind at the time, I was thinking, all these people are moving out here and taking over this ranch land. It's going to be a bunch of subdivisions, just like Hudson Oaks. And it made me kind of sad. And that's what I was thinking about. Then at the same time, I thought, well, these will all be my customers because all these people have to pass my house to come here. So, we'll be their local produce provider. All of a sudden, I swear I thought it fell out of the sky. Something fell from straight, my headlights caught it. It fell and landed on the road in front of me like it fell out of the sky. And I slammed on the brakes, and I thought it was a person at first, and then it stood up. And when it stood up, I really thought for a minute, I was looking like, is it a gargoyle? Is it a demon? What is this? I really thought, I said, is it Nephilim? Is it like a fallen angel? What am I looking at? What's going on here? And I was scared. I had my hands on the steering wheel. One, it was the fear, the adrenaline of almost hitting someone. It was standing there. My headlights were on. I saw him it was like, I want to say him, I don't know what to call it, because it stood up, and it was probably, I would say, between 6 and 6'5", around there. I have a brother that's 6'7" and a dad that's 6'10". So I would say it was about that height, and it had very broad shoulders. It had a human physique, but it had a little bit of hunched shoulders, rounded shoulders, very muscular, very broad shoulders. It had a very wide neck that kind of went down, slanted down on the shoulders, but it was a big neck, like it flared. It had the face. It had like a snout, like a dog, maybe like a Rottweiler, but not skinny and pointed like a German Shepherd, maybe more like a Labrador or something. And it had like a squish snout, and it had really big piercing like almond slanted eyes, but its ears, and it put its ears back. It was standing there, it was like heaving, and it kind of stood up. I think I scared it too when I slammed on my brakes. And it kind of stood up and it heaved, and it had its arms out, and I realized it had really long arms. And I didn't pay attention to the legs at the time past the knees. I couldn't tell you if it had human legs or feet. I think it had a tail, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. All I knew is it had a body like a man that had hair all over it, but it was sparse. But again, it was covered in hair, pretty thick hair. But I could still tell it had like human-like skin and human physique. But the one thing that was really like, it was like level with the hood of my truck what I was looking at was male genitalia. I'm looking at this genitalia and I'm like, that is male genitalia. This is a man, but he does not have the head of a man. And his head, he kind of growled or hissed or made this kind of face. He kind of pulled his face and his ears went back. And that's when I realized his ears were not like a German Shepherd ears or Labrador ears. They were kind of small and pointed, and they laid back like if it was like a bobcat or something that, a cat, how a cat, when they hiss, they lay their ears back. Its ears but it was clearly more like a face like a dog, but it had small ears, and it had, just kind of a round, I would almost say kind of football-shaped kind of head, but it was covered in hair, and it was heaving, and it had these long arms and these long fingers. It had stood up, and it stood there with its arms kind of out to its side, and it heaved a few times, and this all took place like maybe in 10, 15 seconds. And it stood there, and I was white-knuckling the steering wheel, and I had the brake all the way down. I was just terrified looking at this thing. And as soon as that stood up and it heaved and it looked at me and it kind of hissed and its ears went back, this thing just leaped like a friggin' cartoon, just like it landed down. It leaped up, but it went over. It leaped like right to where those trees were. So it leaped out of the road down into the culvert, and then on that other pasture where all the tree limbs had been cut, and over and disappeared off in it just took off. It was like, but it bounced. It was almost like a kangaroo. It just pew, 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 and it took off and disappeared in the dark. And I sat there, I was shaking, I was terrified, and I was like, what just happened? What did I see? And then all of a sudden I realized my back window's open, but my truck windows are down. This thing can come in the back of the truck and get me. What's going on? So I start driving like a crazy woman back down that branch road and up to my house. And I called my husband and I said, you need to open the gate, because in my property, you'd have to drive up, get out, open the cattle gate, pull in, close the gate, drive up to the house. And my house was quite a distance from my gate. I said, you better open that gate and have it wide open, and you better be out on the porch, and that front door better be open. I laid down the law. And he's like, what is wrong with you? And I said, something might be following me. Just get the gate open. So my husband, he did, and I was there within like 5 minutes. He had the gate open. He was out on the front porch with a flashlight, and things were falling. Because I had to hit a cattle guard to get in my property, and pots and trays went flying out of the back of the truck, and I went in the house. I just slammed the truck door, and my husband said, you left your windows open. I didn't care. He went in, he grabbed my keys, he rolled up the windows, and he's like, what's all this junk? What's going on? And I told him what happened. I said, I think I saw a demon, a gargoyle. He's asking me, did it have tail? Did it have wings? what, and I told him about the fear. I said, you hear people talk about they encounter things, and it's this doom, this darkness that is you don't understand, you don't know. And my husband, who's from Puerto Rico, had an experience like that as a young man, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. And I was shaken. And so he grabbed my hands and we prayed, and we just pled the blood of Jesus over it, and he just spoke peace to me. And he said, these things are real. My thing was, why did I have this encounter? My thing is, God has a reason for everything. So God, why did I have this encounter? What happened? What happened? And so then I didn't sleep well that night. And then it was a couple of weeks later, we got through the holidays, but it was just kind of on edge. And then I had shared with a friend of ours who was also had cattle in the area. He was a federal wildlife marshal. I didn't know him that well. I knew his wife well through church, but I said, "Can I meet with you? I don't want you to think I'm crazy." So we went to a restaurant and I sat down and I told him my story, and he said, "You're not crazy, and I'd like to introduce you to some people." He shows up at my house about a week later with a couple of gentlemen. One was like a state trooper, a couple of firemen, a couple of other wildlife marshals. And these guys they mostly go out to Mineral Wells State Park from what they told me, but they are like cryptid hunters or investigators. And they start telling me, well, I tell them what had happened, and they tell me, don't tell anybody else. Don't talk to anybody about this. They want me to take them out to the area that I was. And I had told them, I said, well, I went back out there one time with my husband to show him exactly where, but I refused to go back out there. So my husband took them out there. The day after the incident, when my husband said, we need to go out there and look. When you go out there, you could see the black on the road where I slammed on my brakes. In the daylight, it looked very different. But when we looked, I was standing where the two stripes were, and I was telling my husband, I was sitting right here with my hands on the steering wheel, and it dropped down here to my left. They were clearing land. This land had 3 or 4 of those big metal containers, those shipping metal containers that people turn into barns or whatever.
Yeah.
And they had these on cinder blocks, and they were right next to the fence line, lined up alongside the road, facing the same way I was driving, from not back to front, but they were all facing, and it looked like there were 3 or 4 in a row, and they were on cinder blocks that were stacked like two cinder blocks high. It looked like one of them had fallen over and knocked into the other one and knocked into the other one over like a domino, and they were leaning on the fence, which also had this tree on it, and that was the only thing that was keeping all of these shipping containers from totally collapsing over into the gully. And my husband said it was probably on one of those containers, and the containers fell.
Right.
And then it fell in the road. It didn't fall out of the sky, because I was thinking, what if it fell out of a UFO? Where could it have come from? Because I'm looking up at the sky. There's nothing over the road. It's not like it jumped out of a tree or anything. There was no tall trees. And my husband is the one that put it together. He said, honey, look at these shipping containers. They're right next to where the black marks are. He goes, I think it was probably on the shipping containers. And it was climbing on them, and they started dominoing, and they fell over, and he fell with them and fell in front of your car. It was just perfect timing. That was the only time I ever went back out there. After, when I just showed my husband, I wanted to show him exactly where it happened and what happened, and that was it. I was done with it. Well, my husband actually took these people out there and showed them this group of men, and they started telling us kind of things I didn't want to know. But they were telling us things about Mineral Wells, Texas, which was right up the road from us, where Mineral Wells State Park, and it's labeled the town that Crazy built because the water there is high in lithium. They actually sell the water there, the well water, as crazy water. You can buy it in the grocery store. And they started telling me the whole story about Mineral Wells and Mineral Wells State Park, and that there were things out there, and they seemed to be making their way over to the next county, Parker County. And then, they said, I said, well, maybe I should go talk to local county extension office. Maybe I should tell the sheriff. And they go, no, don't talk to anybody. They're just going to tell you it's a coy wolf because they found coy wolves out. I was like, that was not a wolf. That was a human body. It was clearly two things in one. And so they kind of did some investigation, and they would come by and ask me questions kind of thing. And after a while, I said, I just don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want to, well, in my mind, kind of rehearse the curse kind of thing. I just don't. And then it just seemed like after that happened, all of a sudden I wouldn't go out at night. Like if it got dark, too dark to go close up the chickens, I wouldn't go out there if my husband was working late, sorry, those chickens, I just hope the best for them. I was not going out there in the dark. I had a couple of Great Pyrenees out there that were stockyard dogs, and we had an incident one night where we heard something growl and hiss, and the dogs were barking. And my husband went out there and looked around. He didn't see anything. The dogs were clearly looking up at something in a tree. My husband flashed a flashlight. He didn't see anything. But even then, that stopped me from sleeping with the windows open. It really kind of messed with me. And, I would just sit there and I would ask God, why did this happen? And I would read the word, and the word says, I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And I kept telling myself, okay, Angela, you do not have a spirit of fear and you have a sound mind. You are not crazy, girl. So, I just really wanted, for a long time, was asking God, why did I see this thing? Why did this happen to me? Because it really messed up my world. And then it seemed like we had what would go on the series of unfortunate events. We started having at first I used to call them Lucy moments. Our neighbors' tame animals got through the fence and went in our greenhouses and destroyed them. They're his horses, and he had this pet longhorn, and it destroyed some hoop houses and greenhouses, and we actually had some goats get loose and come in our house. I had the back door open, and they come in it was just, these weird things started happening. Then I started getting, not only did I have fear, but I started getting sick. And I had these weird symptoms, and they didn't know what was going on with me. And it affected me so bad that I could no longer work. Because I could no longer work, I could no longer help on the farm. My husband was carrying the load of the farm and of the business and of his job, and I wasn't working anymore, so he had to do his job, and it just got too much. And we ended up selling as a result. And we had this, so we put our house on the market. So this incident happened in October, and we put our house on the market the following April. So that's the transition time. We had an agent out, and she kind of said, the whole thing is that your property is haunted. Everybody says this property is haunted because this is where the John Doe was. I was like, my property is not haunted. I have never had, haunted anything, in my house. I have never had, I just told her I've never felt a ghost, a spirit, or anything in my house. So then one day I was at home. Our gate was locked, and we were several acres from the road, probably about 9 or 10 acres from the road. So you had to go up the gate and drive up a road to our property to get to our house. Because we had it's about an 8.5 foot, what we called a deer fence around our property to keep, because we ran produce, and we had this area fence, so there wasn't no climbing over the fence, kind of thing. So one day I come out my front door, I walked over towards the gate and picked up a piece of cardboard in a feed bag that had blown from somewhere and had blown. I reached in through our gate, and I pulled it in through our gate, this trash, and I put it in the trash can. And then I proceeded to walk around the side of my house to where my chicken coop was, and I fed and watered my chickens, and we used a fence, a portable fence. So I checked the power line, the solar, did the little test on that, made sure we were good. Then I went around to the back of my house and I watered my dogs, and I came back around and I was checking my bird feeders. When I came back around to the front of my house, there were two people standing on my porch. And I'm looking around. There's no car. How did you get on my property? And I'm really caught off guard because I'm sitting here in flip-flops and shorts. I am not prepared. I don't have a weapon on me. And when you own land, if you have someone come on your pasture or your house or your land, it's not like a neighborhood. They're knocking up to your door, coming on your door. You become wary of anybody that comes on your property.
Right.
It's just when you live rural like that. And so these people, it was a man and a woman. The tall guy, they had sunglasses on. They had on comfortable, sensible shoes, khaki pants, belts. The man had on like a button-up type shirt with a Land's End almost, a kind of windbreaker jacket and sunglasses. And to be honest, he was built, and he kind of reminded me of John Goodman in a way. When John Goodman played Dan Connor, that's who he reminded me of. Well, the woman was not really large. She was probably about 5'5", 5'6". She had blonde hair. It was probably, I would say, she had it pulled back in a ponytail. And she had on sunglasses, and she was wearing sensible shoes, khaki pants. She had on like a polo top shirt, golf top shirt with a windbreaker on. Their windbreakers, those similar, didn't look exactly like. They didn't have any identifying thing on them, and they were sitting on my front porch, and I thought, these people are between me and my front door. They were acting like cops. They kind of looked like cops, and they were acting like cops, and they wanted to talk to me about my incident. And I said, I was like playing a little stupid at first. I didn't want to talk to them. I was not comfortable talking to them. And I really got scared for a little bit. And I didn't see a vehicle. There's no vehicle out on the road. There's no vehicle in my driveway. They couldn't have gotten through my fence. They couldn't climb over that fence. It's 8-foot fence, deer fence. You can't climb over that. And I was sitting there and I said, how did y'all get on my property? They would not answer my question. And they were asking me about the incident. I said, first I played stupid. And then finally I fessed up and I said, it was just some kind of animal, almost hit an animal, and now it's gone. They asked me who I talked to, who I told about the incident, and asking me all these questions. And I said, I told my husband and I think maybe one of my friends at church, but really that's not something you really want to share with everybody, that you almost hit a wild animal. I just kind of played it off. And I was telling them, I said, I'm more concerned about how you got on my land. How did you get through a locked gate? How did you get on my land? Where did you come from? How did you get on my land? They would not answer me, and they were ticking me off. Finally, the guy never said anything. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets. And he never said a word. He was kind of stoic. She did all the talking, and she was trying to be intimidating and scare me. He was standing in the middle of my porch. If I was facing my front door, he was standing on the right side of the porch with me facing it, and kind of away from my door, kind of in the middle of the porch, halfway between the edge of the porch and halfway between the door. She was standing right there next to my door on the left side of my door. And she had walked towards there's 3 steps down, and she had walked towards the steps and stood there talking to me. And she was asking me all these questions and asking me who I reported it to, who I talked to about this, who I shared with it. And I refused. I said, one, I don't even know what you're talking about or what you've been told or what you've heard. And me, I'm thinking that one of these guys said something that I had talked to with a friend of mine, these little cryptid hunters. I said, I'm not having this conversation with you. You need to get off my land. You're trespassers. I said, what organization do you represent? And then they started threatening me with my government. I had a government clearance because of my job. I was like, well, you know what? I've already turned in my resignation. I'm retiring, and I'm not doing that anymore. So you can threaten me all you want. I don't care. So I was almost scared to walk past them. Like, one of them, like, what if they grab me and, like, put me under arrest? And I come from a military and a law enforcement family, so I've seen people go down, and I'm like, I do not want to participate with this. I'm just an old fat grandma. I don't want to have an encounter with them, but I'm not comfortable out here. I'm out here in flip-flops and shorts. I'm out in my property, and the thing that I thought was odd is my dogs didn't come around me. My dogs were usually pretty protective, and they would be right there. I had 2 Great Pyrenees. And my chickens, if I was out, my chickens will fall. And I realize I'm sitting in front of my porch. Usually the chickens follow me. They're on the porch. The dogs are there. No one is here. I'm totally alone. And I'm looking around. I'm looking to the side of my house, and I'm like, what is going on here? Finally, I just muster up the guts, and I step up on the stairs, and I said, you need to leave my property. I'm calling the sheriff. And I walked into my front door, and I shut the front door, and I locked it. I walked like 2 or 3 feet right into the kitchen, right next to that door. My cell phone was on the counter. I grabbed my cell phone, and I look out the window. They are not there on the porch. I open the front door. I mean, literally 5 seconds has passed. I open the front door. I go out there on my porch, holding my cell phone, and I'm looking. They are not there. They are gone. So I'm walking. I walk to the edge of the porch. I look down one side of the house. They're not there. I walk to the other side of the porch. I look down. They're not there. I go back in the house, shut the door, go back to the back of the house, open the back door, and look. They're not in the back part of my property. Go back to the front of the property. This time I grab my weapon, got my cell phone and my weapon, and I go back out on my front porch, and I step down the steps. Now, for them to leave my porch, they're going to have to step in the dirt, either in the flower beds or in that sand that's right in front of my stairs. I'm sitting there looking. I can see the imprints of my flip-flops, but I don't see any other footprints.
Oh, my gosh.
I look in the flower beds. I look on the side. They would have had to have stepped down in the flower beds. You couldn't just step up on my porch. There was big flower beds. They weren't. There was no steps. They were gone. They vanished. I mean, literally. And I wonder if that was like a Men in Black situation that I just dealt with. Men in Black wearing Lands' End. That's what I thought for a minute. They were in khakis, I was a little taken back. I was standing there. There was no cars on the road. They would have had, I have a long drive. There's no way. There was no tire tracks. There was no way they could have gotten into that part unless I let them in through the gate. So anyway, I went in the house. I locked the door. I called my husband and told him what happened. He's like, well, that was his first question. How did these people get into the compound is almost what he called. How did they get in there? And I was like, I don't know. So when my husband came home that evening, he walked the fence line to make sure there was no hole in the fence line anywhere.
And there wasn't. There was no way that they could have cut through somewhere.
Right, because this section, it was about 6 or 8 acres. This is where we grew our produce, and we had our fruit trees. So we had it fenced in from the front gate all the way around. It's like 8.5, 9 acres, I think it was, that it was supposed to be an 8-foot fence, but by the time you put the risers on the top, the bent risers, it's like an 8.5-foot fence. for deer fence to keep the deer from coming on and eating up our produce and eating up our fruit trees. So my husband goes and walks the egg. He's like, there's no hole. There's no, you could probably tell if someone had climbed like the wire and bent the wire if they put a foot in and bent a wire and climbed over. But I couldn't see them climbing over my fence. If they're official, all they had to do was come through the front gate. They could have come up to the gate and hit the buzzer, and I would have buzzed them in or walked out to the gate and unlocked the gate and let them in. But I would have had to unlock the gate, lift the gate, move the gate over, and they would have had to have driven and then all the way up to my house. And there was no way they could have done that. I don't know how they got there. And
like you said, it seemed like they were trying really hard. They had these kind of classic outfits, I guess, like some kind of a uniform that they picked out to come out there. And then not only did they know everything about you, this government clearance that you had, I would assume that's not the easiest thing to come by, and I'm sure you didn't go around telling local people that you had government clearance, but they also played this whole bad cop and then impassive cop, because the man never spoke, which I find a little strange too.
Right. And I was really, if that's the one thing that scared me even more than my encounter, because they invaded my personal space. What I saw and what happened out there was something that I encountered out in the boondocks, out in the sticks,
mm-hmm.
on a country road in the dark. That happens, but to come onto my private property, onto my porch, and literally they weren't there 5 or 10, well, probably I would say 10 or 15 minutes. Because it probably took me that long to walk around the side of the house, feed them the chickens, walk around and top off the water bowl of the dogs, and then walk back around to check the feeders. I mean, and how did they get in my gate? How did they get there? How did they get on my porch?
Well, and I love the fact that you actually had the mind to go, where are their footprints? If they left, and of course they came in, they had no footprints to leave behind. How is that even possible?
Right. And for them to have left my porch or left the view of my porch would have taken more than the few seconds when I come in, shut the door, just literally, because that front door literally to the right was my kitchen, and there was a little bar there that separated my kitchen from the entrance. And I grabbed my cell phone and was calling 911, and I was going to open the door and tell them, hey, I'm calling 911. You're trespassing, And my property clearly had signs that said, trespassers will be shot, survivors will be shot again.
Amen to that.
I had those kind of signs out on my property because when we first moved there and we were growing produce, we paid a lot of money to pull up this fence because we had people come on our property. People would pick their own and leave money on our doorstep, leave money in a can, or they would call me and say, Angela, look under your doormat. I left $10. We come and got 3 or 4 tomatoes from you. And we had on our porch at one time a little refrigerator that we would keep the eggs in. If people wanted eggs, they could come and get the eggs out of the refrigerator and leave money in a can in there. We just kind of did that. So I didn't have to leave my bedroom office and run all the way up to the front of the house all the time just to sell, a $3 carton of eggs. So, but we had problems with people coming on, and we would Jose would say, tomorrow we're going to harvest the watermelons, and we go out the next morning, all the watermelons were gone. And we realized someone had come on, and we saw the tracks. We got out there, and so you learn to pay attention. You pay attention to your land if you got deer tracks, we have a lot of razorback wild boars out there. We had a couple of close calls with them. So that was one of the reasons why we went ahead and bit the bullet and went into debt and put up this fence. And so it was for security, and for them to be able to be there and not have come through that gate. There's the only way you could come into that area is through that front gate. That's the only way you could have gotten in there. There was a side gate that we had, but we had never, since we had that side gate put in, it was like a chain link. It was about an 8.5, 9 foot chain link type gate. We had never even opened it. We just had it there just in case we ever had to bring in a large piece of equipment.
Was there anything odd about the way that the woman was speaking? Like as if she had just learned English that day and was trying really hard to put her sentences together. Anything strange like that?
The only thing that I noticed is that I wondered at one point if she might be deaf, because she had that, that kind of muffled, like when people have a hearing impairment, they're not totally deaf.
Right.
But they have a hearing impairment, and then kind of talk almost like someone who maybe has a hair lip or has some kind of nasally.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only thing that I noticed. She just stood like with her hands to her side, and he never moved. He never moved. He had his hands pockets. He never moved. She moved. She was like standing in front of my front door, facing out towards the stairs when I came around the house. They didn't even talk to me. I had to say, "Who are you? And how can I help you?" And I'm looking around. I turned around and looked like, "How did you get on my property?"
Well,
what,
So that is so strange for that long of a chat with another human. She kept her arms directly at her sides the entire time. She never crossed her arms or put them in her pockets?
No.
That's
she
weird.
She never shifted their weight. The only thing she ever did is she walked from my front door about 3 to 5 steps towards, straight from my door, maybe a little towards the left, towards the stairs where I was standing at the base of the stairs to go up on my porch.
Yeah, that's, okay. So here's what I've got, and so far, and I want to make sure that I get this out because I feel like it may be important. I don't know. And I don't know if you've listened to this episode. If you have the time in the next few days, I would love to get your feedback on this. But it's episode 85, The Unfounded Call. And the events are so stunningly similar between what you just told me and what this deputy sheriff went through it really is stunning. So the initial, let's assume that the onset was seeing this creature, right? Well, his initial onset was seeing, I believe it was between 7 and 9. It was like to the ceiling in an abandoned home, a massive shadow figure. Right. And then he goes through this whole thing where he has the whole missing time, and he wakes up and he's on the side of the road and he's very sick. It mirrors yours. And then guess who shows up at his house? Essentially what you just described. And they said, "We know what happened and we need to confiscate your badge and your gun. You are done. You are fired. You're out of here." And he believed them. It's a whole thing. And I'll say this, he also had things begin to happen at his home. And the last time I talked to him, actually I needed to check on him. It's been probably, a couple years now. There was still things going on. And even though he had moved, things were going down. And I hope that's not the case for you, which we will find out. But it is shockingly similar. And I'll bet if you listen to this episode, you're going to go, "Oh my goodness gracious." So where I'm going with this is if you go off the whole John Keelian idea that all of this is connected, then I suppose it wouldn't matter if it was a really tall shadow person or whatever in the world was in the middle of the road that night for you, right?
Right. It kind of shook my world because of my faith, very evangelical faith that believes in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and we believe that people can be oppressed and depressed, and even in some cases possessed by demons. We believe that I firmly believe that a physical manifestation, like a physical healing, can't take place in your life minus a a spiritual healing too, that God works. I believe that you and I are spiritual beings. We are spiritual beings created by God. We live in a physical body, and we have a soul, which is our mind, our will, and our emotions. That altered every, it didn't make me doubt my beliefs, but it made me pay a lot more attention to things, because we were aware of, I can't remember, Steve, somebody, Tom Horn, L.A. Marzulli, a lot of these people, we had followed them, paranormal and prophecy, and so I really started paying attention to them after this happened, after these events. And in fact, I went on for months and months, and actually, I just now recovered enough that I could start back to work in the last 6 months. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. They told me I had Lyme's. I was tested for Lyme disease. I was tested for lupus. They ultimately said I might have become allergic to plants and produce, or or maybe chemicals, or maybe because the high tension power lines that went through our property, that maybe I had gotten sick from that, but we sold our land. We thought that maybe that was what was making me sick. That's the reason we sold. And we can't be near those high tension power lines. And even after moving away, I was still sick, and I struggled for years. I can send you pictures and show you. I would develop these rashes on my body. I went into an ER one time, and the doctor thought I had radiation burns.
Oh my gosh.
On my body. He's like, and he had him test me for radiation. He asked me, he was asking me all these environmental questions. I mean, it was crazy what I went through, these undiagnosed diseases and bizarre things. And what they boiled it up to is they think it was lupus that was attacking my body. But it took a lot of healing and meditation. Now, that being said, I also, for the first time in my life ever, stepped out of the realms or the guidelines of my faith and talked to other people who believed other things about healing. So I still step faith to that Jesus Christ is my healer and that everything is covered by the blood. But I also begin to pay attention and study, because I was like, Angela, the Bible from Revelations. I know the Bible from Genesis, Revelation, and back again. You can know all that and still not know God or have a spiritual understanding. You're just what I call an educated idiot. And I didn't want to be an educated idiot. So I really started listening to some other people and asking some questions. And to the point that I ended up going to therapy, to a Christian therapist, and talked to them. And even at one point, I came close to it. I'm still on the edge, but I thought about seeking out someone to do some kind of hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that concerns me about hypnosis in certain kinds of meditation is that you are letting down a guard, and it's just like a Ouija board, in that good things can come, good spirits can pop up, but then the majority of the time they're lying spirits. They'll pop up too, and they'll lie to you and misrepresent themselves.
Right.
Well, I kind of feel like that can happen in certain kinds of meditation, or if you are not spiritually sound or have a really good protection around you. If you were to go and do hypnosis, you can open the door to things and let things into your body, give them a right to reside there,
right,
that doesn't need to be there.
Well, and look at what happened while you were, 100% conscious, not in a hypnosis state, and look at all the things that you went through. Okay, so a few questions, and let's go back to that night with the creature in the road. How far away from the truck do you think it was?
Oh, it wasn't even 2 or 3. He could have reached out and touched the hood of my truck. He was that close. And he was so close that standing there, I could see his genitalia, and I could see almost to his knees. But I was like, this is male what is this? This is male genitalia. I mean, my headlights were right on it. I was like, Lord Jesus, what is this? And I didn't pay attention to, that's why he moved so fast. That's why afterwards I could see his legs and feet. And I'm like, what did I see as far as the legs and the feet? I don't know if they were normal legs or the backward dog legs.
That part was a little bit too fast for you to really see them.
Mm-hmm.
What about hair on its head?
It did have hair on its head. It had hair on its face. It was a lot of hair, but you could see through the hair to the skin.
Okay, so where it had hair, it was thick hair, and then where it didn't, you could just basically see the skin.
Right. It was hair all over the body. It had massive hair, I couldn't see the top of the head, but I saw the face and where the ears were, and there was hair. There was hair all over the face. There was hair around the eyes and on the cheeks and the face and the snout. It wasn't hair so thick like it's covered like a dog on the face and the torso and the body. Like a dog, all you see is the hair, the coat. It wasn't a coat, but it was long hair, but it wasn't thick long hair like maybe an orangutan has, that you know, it was hair that you could see through. You could see the skin, but you could see he was covered with long hair too. And his arms, I could tell that it kind of draped on his arms and his hands, you know, but it wasn't, it would look like human fingers. They were very long. And part of me just kept wanting to go, did he have 5 or 6? Do you have 5 or 6? Because of something that L.A. Marzulli said about some of the Nephilim have 6 fingers. And then I was trying to, you sit and try to play it back over. What did I see? What did I see? And I know what I saw was not human, but then it was human. I don't even know how to say that. It was not human, but then it was human. It was like two things meshed together.
I know that you mentioned early on that you guys don't really partake in, scary movies and horror shows and all of this stuff, but have you ever come across anything in a TV show or a movie or online that looks like what you saw? Anything close?
The only thing that I ever came across that was really close to what I saw was a photo. It was part of a video, but it was a photo, and I wish it scared me so bad I never looked at it again, but a friend sent it to me, and it's a photo of what they called a dog man that was out under a street lot in like a town or a neighborhood. And it was under a street light, and it was almost like it was in motion, and it was a camera that had caught it, and they froze the picture. And a friend who I confided in found that photo and showed it to me, and it brought the whole event back. As soon as I saw that was close to what I saw.
Was it on all fours?
No, it was upright. Scared the P. Diddy out of me. And it was supposedly, she was trying to explain to me, she goes, I think it's a photo that was taken from a security camera, and it was something that come under a security light or a street light. It looked like it may have been in a parking lot or on a road, and it was this dog / human looking thing. It was bipedal. It was walking upright. And it looked like it was kind of blurry. You know how when you catch something in motion in a picture and it's kind of blurry, but that was closest thing that I've ever, but I haven't really gone to seek out or look.
No, you don't need to. You've seen it in person right in front of your truck, right? There's no need to do that. So you see this photo of what most people would label a dog man, but then you're also talking about the Nephilim, right? So, at the end of the day, and I know that you don't know for sure, none of us do, but what do you truly feel that creature was?
Well, I talked to my stepfather, who was in military, he's active military. He used to tell me stories when my mom married him when I was like 7 or 8. And I remember his military buddies come around, and we had a beer miser, and so I learned to pour beer without foam on the top so that I could sit I had to be useful. So I wanted to sit in the cooler and sit on the Coleman cooler,
Yeah.
listen to their stories, and I had a purpose. I would go refill beer glasses, right? So I would listen to their stories, and they would talk about. My stepdad told me this. We lived in Duncanville, Texas. And when my mom married him, he moved us to Duncanville, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, Texas. We lived right off of Highway 20. And if you head from Duncanville and you're heading towards like Grand Prairie, Arlington area on Highway 20, there is this road, the freeway, I-20. It's 6 lanes on one side and 6 lanes on the other, and it splits because there's like this mountain, this big mound in between. It's a mountain, literally, and it's near Mountain Creek Parkway in Spur 408. But it splits, and then the freeway goes back together and heads into the Grand Prairie, and it's in the Mountain Creek Parkway area. My stepdad would tell these stories about, that the reason you can't go up there, and we would see military jeeps up there and stuff. It was clearly no trespassing. If you got stuck on the side of the freeway there, you did not climb up on that mountain. But he would say, there's an underground base there. And he would tell stories he about, as a Marine, that after Vietnam, he had come back to Duncanville. And Duncanville at one time actually used to be a military base that they closed up and they sold it back to it became the incorporated city of Duncanville. Anyway, he said that when he came back as a Marine from Vietnam, he was actually assigned, and he would say, if you go down there, there's an underground base under I-20 near Mountain Creek Parkway, down underground base. And I was like a little girl, I think the only thing I'd ever really seen was like Superman or maybe Star Wars about that time. It all to me was like he was just telling these wonderful stories. I don't know that I believed it. He would say and it goes 30 stories down, and he would tell them, or I would listen, and they would all talk about, his military buddies, about this underground base and about all this. They would talk about experiments with animals and humans, that it took place in these underground bases, that this kind of thing went on. And and this is like my mom married him like in 74, 75. So this is in the 70s and the early 80s that I would hear these stories. And I know that at one time in the early 80s, my stepdad, who had been out of the Marines for about 5 years, all of a sudden I'm out in the front yard one day and official vehicles pull up. These men in uniform, Marines, take him in a back room. They close the door. The next thing I know, like 2 weeks later, my stepdad is no longer working his job, that he has gone back into the military, and he's out at Camp Lejeune. And we went during the summer for 2 weeks at Camp Lejeune and came home, but we weren't supposed to tell anybody that my stepdad went back in the military. I don't know. He went back in the military for about 6 years. It was all hush-hush, and then he was not. And then he went back to his job. He got his job back because he went to – but, he was like 45 years old by then. Well, who takes a man in his mid-30s into his mid-40s back in the military? It just didn't make sense to me, but he would tell these stories about this underground base that he served under. He would not, when he went and called back into the military, I asked him, did they take you back to that base? He goes, no, but that base is still there. It's active. And I was like, well, I want to go to the base. And he told me, don't you go up on that mountain. You and your friends stay away from there. Don't go up on that mountain. He also had told me, he said that, or they would talk about, I would just kind of eavesdrop and listen and ask questions. And when I started asking too many questions, they sent me packing. It's time for you to move on, go to your room. But I'd hear them talk about that reason they built that base there, because Mountain Creek Lake was right there, a small lake, and that they said, I remember saying that so ships could go down, like spaceships could go underwater into this base. But when they got there and they built the base, or something was wrong and they couldn't. And then I remember him saying this, so they're going to build another lake. And I thought, where are they going to build a lake out here? but that they were going to build another lake near this underground base. And I didn't believe that. I couldn't imagine them building a lake because I lived in that community. Well, sure enough, guess what happened in the 80s? Cedar Hill, which is adjacent to Duncanville, right there next on the other side of Mountain Creek Parkway, they put in the largest man-made lake in the United States, I think in the world. It's a man-made lake. It's called Joe Pool Lake. It is there. So they took out half of the city of Grand Prairie and half of the city of Cedar Hill and put in a lake. And it's right, it comes right up near 20, near that supposedly underground base. So when all this stuff happened, I after we left the farm and we moved, my stepdad called me. He's like, What happened? Y'all were living the dream. You were selling the farm. You could have called me. I would have come helped. Or, you could have, he was telling me, you could have leased out your pasture land, or you could have, gone and got some of these, hippie farmers that want to work on a farm and live on the land and help you out. He had all these, he was disappointed that we had sold and moved away. And I finally told him, and I told him about the officials that came, these government officials that came on the porch. My stepdad got very somber with me. And technically he hadn't been my stepdad for many years because he and my mom divorced when I was like 17 or 18, but I still consider my stepdad. And he got really somber with me. And I started asking him questions. And I told him what I saw, and he said, well, he had never seen anything like that, but he believes me 100%. He goes, I don't doubt what you're telling me happened. And he told me this thing, and I remember it really sat with me. He said, you know how older neighborhoods are in a grid? He said, you go into any country neighborhood, and they're in a grid. The streets run north, south, east, and west. They crisscross. You have little blocks, and there's 100 ways in a neighborhood and 100 ways out. And he said, and I remember him saying this actually when I was younger, they would talk about it, the planned communities or neighborhoods, the subdivision. This is what my stepdad told me this last time. He said, that subdivision thing, he said, this is the government's plan. He goes, I was part of this. I understood. I was part of this planning. And he said, the government planned these neighborhoods. They planned it to say it's a safer neighborhood. There's 1 or 2 ways in a neighborhood or 1 or 2 ways out. And these neighborhoods, you get in them, they're kind of confusing. They have cul-de-sacs. And, he said, because they can put a fence around it and they can control the population. And he said, whereas these gridded streets, they can't really do that. And he started telling me, and that this all took place the same day that I told him about this. We spent the whole day together, and he said another thing. He said he goes, there is never any such thing as lead poisoning from paint. He goes, you cannot find one medical study or one medical case of a child getting lead poisoning from eating lead paint. It's just impossible. It just never happened. He said the reason they took lead out of paint, and he started telling me about this, their government contract with DuPont, was because the lead kept the government with frequencies. It had something to do with frequencies. He started telling me about certain frequencies can make you see or experience certain things, or they could do mind control with frequencies. And he said also they can't eavesdrop on you. And he said, or it would probably affect your cell phones too. He goes, if you go into an old building that's got lead paint, he goes, it'll affect your cell signal. And he said that's the reason they quit using lead paint. It's about the government being able to eavesdrop and control. He said that's what the planned neighborhoods are about. Two is that they can just control. There's 1 or 2 ways in or 1 or 2 ways out, and they can control populations in the neighborhood. He goes, because I was part of that planning. That's the reason I went back in the military. There was a plan in place, and I was going to be part of that. And then he started telling me about how this is what he started talking about. He goes, these cryptids, these Bigfoot and Chupacabra and all this stuff that people are seeing, and these Mothmen, and he started talking about these things, and he was telling me about things I didn't even know. He was talking about goat men and all this stuff. He said, all these cryptids are real. And he said, and they are going to be an army, and they're going to use them to enforce people that are in rural populations. And part of me was thinking, how much of this is military PTSD and how much of this is truth? I spent the whole day with him, and I really struggled back and forth with some of the things that he told me. And then in Texas, we had this thing where all of a sudden we saw a lot of Walmarts close, and the military was coming in, and military was doing all this action, some kind of exercises that they were doing in these neighborhoods around here. And I really thought, part of me was like, well, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe it's all tied in. What really struck me is he was telling me, I believe you 100%, because they were doing that kind of research in this underground base. And I've even taken my husband, and we've driven that area. I've gone into Google Earth and looked above at that little mountain there on 20, and I look at that lake, and I think, well, maybe he's not crazy. Maybe there is a lot of truth to that. I mean, clearly, anybody can go try to climb that mountain right now, and a Jeep will come off the top of that mountain, and they will come out, and you will be arrested for being on that mountain. And I don't even know if it's fair to call it a mountain. It's this big hill of land that sticks up, that splits a freeway. I wonder, because he says you go drive up there. He says he's been there. You come up the freeway, and he said you just exit off of the freeway onto the side of the road, and there's a dirt road, and you go climb that dirt road, and you go up to the top of that hill. And he said, and then there's these two steel metal doors, and you drive in, and he said, and there's a large elevator that you can go on that can hold a tank or 18-wheelers, and it can go down underground. And it goes down underground. It goes 30 stories under I-20.
Well, and something that you mentioned in your voicemail was the fact that, and it's obvious as you're talking, the kinds of things that he supposedly, worked on, and the things that he knew or knows, is the fact that he wasn't just a Vietnam vet. He was spec ops. He was a special operator. He was in with a whole lot of clearance, obviously.
Right. When my mom married him, he was military, and he would disappear. When she met him, they had like a long kind of off again. I thought it was on again, off again, dating for like several years. I thought, because I didn't see him around, they broke up, and then I saw him around and they got back together. My mom had told me, no, he was serving his country. He's serving his country. But he never, whenever he would just talk to people in general, he would say, in Vietnam, I served in the military, and I drove an amphibian, which is this little water kind of Jeep thing. And I fired howitzers. That's what he would tell people. That's what he did in Vietnam. Part of me wondered, because I knew he did suffer at sometimes, some issues of PTSD. He had a little bit of insomnia and stuff that he dealt with. But I really struggled for a long time at how much was truth and how much was fantasy. Not that, because he was, fully functioning human being. He was very logical. He was very good with money. He planned well his life and his retirement up until the day he died. He always had his ducks in a row, and he was a Marine. Everything in its place, and a place for everything. His life was very ordered. At this, he had no reason ever to lie to me. But when this happened and I went to him, I found comfort in the fact that he just said, yeah, I believe you 100%, and he was very intrigued by how they just showed up on the doorstep. And he did ask me this. He goes, I've had something similar happen to me before a couple of times. And I was like, oh, really? And he wouldn't really tell me the particulars, but he looked at me and he goes, did you hear a popping noise? And I went, what do you mean a pop? He's like, kind of like someone popping a soda lid or something, like a pop. And he did that thing on his mouth, like a pop. And I was like, I don't know. No, I don't recall hearing a pop. And he goes, when they come and go, they pop. I didn't hear a pop. So I don't know. He says, yeah, when they come and go, they pop. And did he mean specifically a dog man or just a general they? I guess when those cops show up, like he was talking like,
not the creature, the two people. Okay.
Yeah, the people that were on my porch. She goes, when they come in and out, they pop. They make a popping noise.
Oh, that's weird.
When they come in and out of the atmosphere, and I was like, I didn't hear a pop,
Well,
but
do you think that maybe possibly that they had actually always been watching you because of what your stepdad did for his work?
I don't know, because my parents, they divorced when I was like 16, 17. I think they separated and they actually divorced when I was 18. I was already married. But the thing is I went from, my mom didn't really practice Judaism. My mom was just kind of a free spirit. I don't know what you call her. My mom was, is to this day an eternal teenager. I just tell her to grow up. But my dad definitely, but my parents were both, their families grew up together in Israel. My mom, until after my parents divorced, was just a devout Jew, as my father was. My mom, even though I was raised majority by my mom, to me, Judaism was more like, certain customs that we observed because of our bloodline and because of our heritage. And it wasn't really a spiritual thing or religious thing. My mom was dabbling in some things. I think she practiced with Wicca and, Universalism and Baha'i and all these different things. Like, she even read like Ron Hubbard books and stuff. When I was growing up, I remember my mom like reading astrology, love signs and stuff, and Zolar's Encyclopedia of Ancient and Forbidden Knowledge, and the PDR, she read the physician's death reference too. My mom was just that kind of person. And she was always exploring stuff. And my stepdad was just like, whatever makes her happy, makes her happy. He was just, I know that it's country and we respect police officers and we respect the military and we respect the law and we tell the truth and you always, salute the flag. That's the way we were raised. Our right to weapons, our right to protect ourselves, our right to land. And even though he respected the government doesn't have a right to come into your house and try to tell you how to run your family. He was very respectful, and I was raised more. I spent more time with them. That became more of who I was. My father, who was very, very, very wealthy, I would see him, and he practiced more of a Jewish household. When I was 17, almost 18, I went through this. I don't even know. I kind of felt like maybe, I don't know. I just felt like God opened doors for me. I went from, I could care less about religion. Let's party. Let's go to the rodeo. I had this whole plan that I was going to go to Texas A&M and become a large animal vet. I was going to have a ranch, following my family's footsteps and have a ranch and that kind of thing. I even at one point, this is the truth, in my senior year at Duncanville High School, they had how they have a career day for all the seniors. And so you have all branches of the military come out there. You have people with all these different colleges come out there, the recruiters. Well, my stepdad was a Marine, and I thought that was the greatest thing in the world, even though he was like really a jerk a lot of times. He was a curmudgeon, but I saw him as powerful and respectful, and I loved Marines. And I saw a Marine, I would say Semper Fi. I was like red, white, and blue. And I went and joined the Marine Corps. And that night at dinner, I told them, I thought my family would be proud. I'm sitting at the dinner table with my brothers and sisters, my stepdad and my mom. And I said, I pre-enlisted. So when I become 18, I can go and join the Marine Corps. And I had all my paperwork and stuff. I said I pre-enlisted. And my stepdad pushed the table. He didn't push himself back from the table. He shoved our dining room table and shoved it into me and cussed so much he was spitting food. He left the room. He went back to his office. he was talking on the phone, maybe 20, 30 minutes. We sat at the table. We were terrified. My mom just said, "Eat your food."
Yeah, he was not having that for his daughter. No way. Yeah.
No. And he come back in like 30 minutes and he said, "You're unenlisted.
Well,
so you might as well forget about that."
Yeah, he kind of handled that.
Right. And later I asked him about that, and he said that in his reasoning was, he told me, because as a woman, it'll make you hard, and he felt it would destroy me mentally because the Marines, they break you down to build you up,
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at him, I said, "Well, you've been doing that to me since I was 8 years old," because he really was that. There were many times that my dad had to call him and say, "These are children. They are not Marines. I'm not going to tell you to run your household, but these are my kids that live in your household." That was a contention. But at that point, I come to think of it, I actually think back, why didn't I go to another branch of the military and enlist? I don't know why I didn't. But he had told me because as a woman, they're horrible to women. And it's very different now. I mean, women still have issues in the military, but I think he did it. He was trying to protect me,
of course.
But part of me, I just wanted to know. I remember all the stories, and I wanted to know all the secrets, Well,
you may have found out some of them, maybe a little bit too close for comfort, right? Okay, so before I forget, let's zip back to the creature sighting, because there's something that I just wanted to get more detail on, because I do like the idea that, you're looking at these shipping containers and they had slid down kind of near the gully and near the fence line, that the fence was essentially holding them up in a way, or at least they were pushed against them. Mm-hmm. You had all the windows down and you were going kind of slow because all the stuff at the back of the truck. Did you hear those things move at all? I mean, did one of them actually bang into the other? Once you went back the next day, were they actually touching at some point where you could see a whole bunch of paint come off and where they had slammed together maybe?
Well, the thing that one point I thought I heard something, but you know what it kind of sounded like to me is someone driving across a cattle guard.
Okay.
Is what it sounded like to me. So I remember hearing that at one time. I don't know if it was the containers or if I actually heard someone out in their pasture driving across their cattle guard.
Right. So
that was the only thing that I heard. Now, they were three of them. I think there were four. 2 or 3 of them were like that rusty orange, mauve red look, faded railroad card, and one of them was like a faded hunter green. We didn't go on the property. I mean, we could see them there. We could step off of the blacktop road down into the culvert, the little grass drainage, and touch the front one, the one that was laying on the fence. We could have touched it if we wanted to. I mean, we didn't. I think if we went down and touched it, they might have continued to fall, into that. And then later, my husband said he went through there and they had a backhoe, and it looked like the backhoe, they were using the backhoe to lift them up, and it was bending the top of them, and he could tell they had one of them open, and they clearly had building supplies in them. And that someone who was building their house, clearing the land for that lot to build their house, had stored their building supplies in those containers. That's all he said. Yeah, those containers were for build. Because I had said, "You don't think they had that animal trapped in one of those containers, do they?" He's like, "No, I went by there one day and it was building supplies. They had a backhoe. They were using a backhoe and pulley system to lift those containers back up." And he said, and when they lifted them up, they put them flat on the ground. They no longer had them on cinder blocks.
Well, for now, it's my last question, but you said that your husband told you that he saw one when he was a child. Under what circumstances did he see one, and what did his look like?
Well, my husband is from Puerto Rico, from Patillas. He's what you call Taino. He's the First Nations of Puerto Rico, Taino Indian. And he lived in a village outside of Patillas, which is like where the mountains meet the ocean. And his family they had a banana and coffee plantation, about 300 acres. And there was like 15 kids. And he grew up in that area, and he actually said that what he saw was what they were probably considered the chupacabra in Puerto Rico. I'd heard the name chupacabra before. I didn't know that it was a cryptid. I didn't know what the word meant. I'd heard people. I don't even know where I even heard the word before. And I was like, "What? By the way, what is a chupacabra? What is that?" And he told me they call it the goat sucker or blood sucker or whatever, and that it's like clearly like maybe an alien or something. So he said that he had seen something out in their plantation and it scared him. He didn't go into too many details, but he said it was clearly not human. And he went running back to the house, and he was actually scolded. He was raised by his grandparents, and his grandparents actually scolded him and said, "You're not supposed to be out of the yard at night. You don't leave the yard at night. You don't go." They scolded him for going out, and they'd always told him, "You don't go out at night around here. You don't." Anyway, he said that a few nights later, he and his cousins cousins lived next door, and he was over there next door, and he was spending the night with cousins, and they had a VCR. It was a big deal because they had a VCR and they had Disney movies, and that was a big thing to them. So they were watching these Disney movies, camped on the floor, and they fell asleep, and that he and his cousin Raul, he doesn't know if he woke up or his cousin woke up, but basically what he said is that something came and it looked like the face of what he had seen in the forest, but all of a sudden it was like a spiritual face. It was over him. He said, "I don't know if I was dreaming or I was awake, but Raul was awake because I heard him and we both screamed." So he must have seen it too. And we ran out of the house. He goes, "I don't know where Raul went." He goes, "But I ran back home to Grandma and Grandpa." And he goes, "I literally climbed up on a tree and climbed into their bedroom window." He's like, "I was even scared to go around the house. I went directly from the next door house in and climbed this tree and climbed up into their window screaming, and then got whooped for being out." And then, and then the whole family would say, "Hey, you've seen this thing. It's always going to chase you," kind of thing. And he was like, "That was the one of the things I thought about." He said he left the island when he was 15, and he thought, "Now this thing will never chase me because I'm leaving." He goes, "Just get me through the Bermuda Triangle and get me to the United States and I'll be okay." And he after that, but he still, when he talks about that story when he was a little kid, he goes, "At first I thought it was just a dream, but Raul saw it too, his cousin." So, and the funny thing is Raul still lives in that house that it happened in to this day. So,
Oh, wow.
and we still own that plantation. We just don't go there. I just, since the hurricanes and stuff,
Right.
we just don't go there. We just let family live there. And I don't know if I have any desire to go there. This whole incident, it left me, I don't know, like a little shell-shocked, a little weird. For a long time, I didn't want to talk or tell anybody or deal with it. And then my health issues, they never could find anything. And my last doctor said to me, part of this could be a little psychosomatic. Have you had a traumatic event? And I was like, kind of telling him a little bit. I didn't want to go into it because I thought he's gonna sign a piece of paper and lock me up. But he said, "I really want you to go talk to somebody." And so I went through this Christian counselor, well, actually a Christian psychologist, and she's the one that said that first person that she brought me, she said, she said, "Maybe you ought to contact L.A. Marzulli and tell him about what happened." And then she mentioned she gave me a link to this other YouTube channel that was all about dog men, actually two of them that talked a lot about dog men. And I was listening to some of these and I went, I didn't, it was like, do I really believe some of that or not? And then I was talking to my husband. My husband goes, "Well, how do you think if you were to tell your story and for someone to say they don't believe you, how do you think that made you feel?" And then I was really struggling whether I was going to share my story. And then they shared with me your information. And I thought, I know her voice. I've recognized her from somewhere. And I don't know if I'd heard you before or something, but I started listening to some of the Into the Fray, the recent episodes, some of the more recent stuff, some of the interviews you did. And so that's the reason I reached out. I went, oh, maybe it's partly because you're a female, but I thought, well, she seems to really listen and understand, and maybe this will be my person that I could share it with. And that when I told a friend of mine that I was going to share about what had happened, they had said, there's other people that have been seeing things out there. I bet you they're going to come forward. And I was like, who's seen what out there? Because to be honest, I would tell people, I don't want to know what happens out there. We've moved away. I don't want to know what happens out in Parker County, Texas. I don't want to hear anything about it. I'm done. I have moved on. Then another part of me was like, well, who's been hearing? Who's seen what? What has been said? Has people reported? Have they reported to the sheriff's department? Have they, reported to local police department? What's going on? And she's like, well, I never told you because you said you didn't want to hear anything about Parker County, Texas. So, which is it? So now she's saying that there are things that are going on, and they're manifesting, or they're seeing things. And she says she believes, this is her opinion, that her and her husband believe it's because of all that property out there now is becoming where all the big Dallas corporate executives from the Dallas-Fort Worth area are coming out there, and they're buying land, they're putting in subdivisions, and they're building these Mac mansions out there. And so now what used to be rural is going to eventually become the suburbs. And all these farmers are moving out. All these ranchers are moving out and selling their land, and they're selling it to developers. And now all these subdivisions are going in, and it's pushing them out. And so people are starting to see things out there. They said, one of my friends said to me, he said, I bet you could go to every farmer out there, knock on their door, every rancher and farmer, and they would all have some stories to tell you. And he said he called them jigaboos, about the jigaboos that go on out here. He goes, because he said, go down to the local feed store, go to the Tractor Supply, to the guys that hang around in the feed counter. They will tell you some stories. I thought, I really don't want to go there. I don't want to know. So part of it is like, I just have to realize, for a long time, I thought maybe I was crazy or a little crazy. And then I think the biggest question I have is why? Why was I allowed to see this? Part of me goes, because as a Christian, I walk in a certain way that I'm protected. So I don't open that door. I don't go see horror movies, and I don't have, read certain books or anything. I don't go there because I don't want to open a door to something. And then for this to happen and literally fall in front of me, it's my big question is, okay, God, why? Because there's a reason for everything. Why me? Why this incident? And what am I supposed to do with this information? And I just finally, I think I got tired of being a victim to it. And, that Norma Ray, I'm pissed off and I'm not going to take it anymore kind of thing. And right. I'm not going to live in fear anymore.
Well, and that's the problem, right? Because you can torture yourself with it and think about it every day and do the why me and what was it and will I see it again, which hopefully you probably won't. I think that was lightning striking, which is good, right? But that's what we're all out here doing. Those of us that are into this stuff, or even if you're not and you had the experience and then you kind of get this bug, right? Like a bug bites you and then you kind of want to know, but you kind of don't. I understand that a whole lot. But that's the problem, is that none of us are probably ever going to get any of the answers, and it can drive you nuts. But you certainly are not crazy, because I can tell you that I have had many people on here that have had similar experiences. All of them have the same feelings about it. The why me? And a lot of times it is this one-off situation.
Well, I finally settled it down. Last night I told my husband about the call he said, are you going to do it? I was like, yeah, I'm going to follow through. I'm going to commit. I'm going to follow through. And I said, either people will embrace it, or people will think I'm 3 fries short of a Happy Meal. But either way, I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to be done. I'm put it out there. No longer. It's almost like, I think one of the enemies of fear is secrets and shame. That's how the enemy works. And I am not going to be driven by fear or shame. That's not going to control me. That's not going to be the spiritual force. Ephesians 6 talks about that that there are hierarchies, and there are powers and principalities and of darkness and all these things. And I was reading Ephesians 6, and I was thinking, I am not going to let this control me. I'm just going to put it out there, because it clearly, if it's, there's other people dealing with it, and clearly the government is aware, and we don't have the answers. And I don't know that we'll always have the answers. I know that when I go to heaven, I'll have the answers. I ask the Holy Spirit all the time. I said, your word says I have the unction of the Holy One, and I know all things. Well, I want some answers. I want to know what this is, and I want to know what's going on, and I want to know, why that happened, and my husband made some things. He said, listen, it happened, but, you had a protection. It ran away. It could have attacked you.
No, it certainly could have. It was close enough and obviously strong enough. Look at how it moved away from you. Well, no, that's why I was so flat out excited when you left the voicemail. But sometimes people leave voicemails and things just to get it out. They don't necessarily want to come on the show, and I totally respect that. But when you agreed, I was extremely excited, because I knew I had enough of the general swipe of information to know that this was going to be some incredible encounters, and a succession of things had gone down to where it was this puzzle, and it was very unique. And I mean, listen, guys, she called it Weirdo Alley. Well, you didn't call it that. It's named that. And I didn't know about that. Now I know. So Weirdo Alley, Parker County, Texas. If anybody anywhere around that area, it sounds like it already has a lot of cool, weird stuff going down. If anybody else has any information regarding anything that was said by Angela today, please reach out to me, Shannon, at intothefrayradio.com, and I can then forward that to you, Angela, and then it's up to you if you wanted to go down the road of talking to whomever it is. But I'll be happy to do that, because that's a big part of why I do what I do, is to try to get the information out there and get corroboration for those that are seeking the answers. So I'll be happy to do that for you. That is absolutely no problem. And again, just a huge thank you for being willing to come on and do this. I know it's not the easiest thing to do, and I'm very sorry for all the illness that you've suffered, whatever the cause was. I'm just glad that you're feeling better.
Well, thank you very much. I am on the other side. I still deal with some issues, and I'll send you those pictures. So people look at them and they're like, that does look like some kind of burns all over your skin. It's crazy. I don't know what it was. People talk about this. If it's a dog vein, they say, oh, or if you see a cryptid, it kind of always follows you around, or like you said, things. Maybe you become hypersensitive to that stuff, or
right.
More open. It thins the veil. I've heard all different kinds of things said about it. But me, I just think, I'm a spiritual person, and I live in a body. I have a soul, which is my mind, my will, and emotions. And so, yeah, I'm a spiritual being. And so I'm gonna address this as a spiritual thing, and use my faith and put that hedge of protection about me. But at the same time, I'm not going to be gripped by fear. Right. And that was the reason for my call. I'm just going to put it out there, and hopefully it helps someone else. And, and I just speak blessings to anybody that's even encountered this. Anybody that even encounters this, Well,
yeah, you are very brave to be willing to do this. And I truly cannot thank you enough for even considering it. So I thank you so much. And we will be in touch. This is not like a goodbye from me. We'll be in touch. And I know that people will be reaching out to me in regards to your encounters.
Well, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for your time. You have a good day.